Hello and welcome to my review of Mashle Chapter 58 Mash Bernadette and the Final Exam. This chapter starts off from where the previous chapter ended, with Mash facing down Margaret in the center of the Colosseum. The announcer declares that the match is to begin, but of course Mash cannot fight without first having his calories, so he pulls a cream puff out of within his robe ready to have a snack. Margaret responds, surprisingly in kind, pulling out a shrimp on a fork. Mash watches in curiosity as Margaret continues to dip the shrimp in tartar sauce, even going as far as to question if he can even taste the shrimp with that much sauce on it. The response Margaret gives is about what you would expect from a character with over-the-top tastes in food, telling Mash that it was a silly question, because he is not putting sauce on his shrimp but putting his shrimp on tartar sauce. Mash actually sweat drops as he comments that Margaret has the eyes of a madman and that this is going to be a tough fight. We then transition over to Dot, thinking about how the crazier someone is the more powerful they are, although he does admit that his option is biased, but he is not wrong. The stronger someone is, the more likely they are to get away with certain eccentricities that a normal person couldn't manage. So perhaps it's not that crazy people are strong, just that strong people are free to show how crazy they really are. We then move to Caldo, who stands alone watching, waiting for the fight to commence. As he is doing so, he thinks on the fact that Uta chose Margaret because he has complete faith in him to win. That is the reason why he has not made another attempt on his life until the tournament, and so Caldo comes to the conclusion that Margaret can absolutely finish Mash off, and I believe that might actually be the first time Caldo has referred to Mash by his name, in the translation I read at least. Then we get back to the arena, with Margaret asking if they should start. And as he does so he lifts his hands up, his wand held up as he appears to be preparing to lead an orchestra more than begin a serious fight. Around him a tremendous amount of magical power seems to flow out of him, enough that it causes Finn to begin feeling sick, with Lance explaining to him with that much power it is no surprise he can feel it. And before we get back to the fight, Lance thinks about how this is the power required to become a divine visionary, so Mash should show him he can do better. Mash begins to charge at Margaret head-on when the mage points his wand at him and uses what according to Finn is a basic spell, and Dot believes that Mash can knock it aside easily, but they both get a surprise when what looks like a magical ball collides with Mash's hands, as he lowered himself preparing to smack it aside like it was a volleyball. His feet sink into the ground, causing it to break under him as he is forced to skid backwards, while Mash comments that it's as heavy as a bowling ball. Then suddenly the ball accelerates, pushing Mash backwards even as he digs his feet into the ground as hard as possible, causing the ground to be ripped up, throwing rubble around the arena. Dot can't help but yell out, questioning why Mash can't return the serve, so Mash is going to slam into the wall, something that Mash himself is keenly aware of as he glanced back to see the wall. A moment later an explosion goes off as the wall is impacted, but when the smoke clears it reveals Mash is no longer there, only a crater is left behind, causing the crowd to question where he had gone. At this point, after all the crazy stuff people had seen him do, I would expect they would have just started to go along with it. While the crowd is still confused, Mash appears behind Margaret, wrapping his arms around his midsection before leaping straight up into the air before flipping them over and sending them both crashes back into the Colosseum floor, with a move he calls spine magic, Hellfall. The crowd explodes with shock and excitement, questioning if it is already over and if it was possible for Mash to have taken him out in just one hit. Given how strong Mash is compared to a regular human even in this world, and the fact that the ground was hit hard enough to cause an explosion, if Margaret did not do something to soften the impact, it would be a hard sell to believe that he wasn't taken out by that attack. Dot begins to question how Mash managed to avoid hitting the wall, while Finn explains that Mash ran backwards as fast as he could, outpacing the spell so he could avoid the wall, and then Dot has a moment of amusing clarity where he wonders why they are referencing a bunch of non-magical stuff like bowling balls and returning serves, but he concludes that it's probably no big deal. This feels like the author coming out and saying that despite this being a magical world, where everyone can use magic. Mundane activities and ideas still exist and are still common as they are in our own world, so we should expect them to refer to something mystical and magical. We then get to see that surprise Margaret is not done yet, as the smoke clears to reveal him, much to the audience's surprise, unharmed. We then get an explanation from Caldo that Margaret used a note to cushion his fall before he could hit the ground, sort of like an air cushion. He also wonders why no one is calling out Mash for naming his throw like it was some sort of magical spell. Meanwhile he can hear people saying about how they thought Mash couldn't use magic and how they had never heard of spine magic before. I seriously hope that's just a joke and people don't start to think Mash can actually use magic at this point, or else it's going to really throw a wrench into the story for me. Then we get right back to the fight, with Mash attempting to rush around Margaret only for the mage to turn and point his wand directly at him. Rather than Finn panicking for once, this time it's Dot shouting about how an attack and point blank would be bad. However, both Margaret and Mash stop, surprising both Dot and Finn. Margaret himself notes that Mash is trying to protect something, to which Mash deadpanned and brings out yet another cream puff. I wonder just how many of those he can store in his robe at any one time. Are the robes magical? Do they have many pockets? I have questions about the mechanics of these robes and their cream puff holding capacity. But moving on from my need to know how Mash's robes work, Margaret remarks that they cannot fight at their fullest when something so precious is on the line, so he should set it aside. And of course, someone walks out into the stadium, with a tray to collect the lone cream puff, while Mash comments that he did not know Margaret had a chivalrous side. Honestly, I am getting the impression that Margaret is the sort of person who seeks powerful, worthy opponents above all else, and in doing so he has his own set of morals that he is not willing to break because it would get in the way of that desire. Despite being in opposition to Mash's current goals, I think his search for strength is pure in its own way and I can't find it in myself to hate him. Anyway, the announcer is trying to hype everyone up, declaring that the fight has them on the edge, despite the fact the talk just having been about the importance of a cream puff. Finn, Dot and Lance all watch on with their own individual dumbstruck expressions, with Finn questioning what that conversation was about, while Dot wants those few seconds back. But it is Lance who has the most interesting thoughts, realizing that neither of them is going all out and are in fact just testing each other out. At the same time, Caldo is thinking about how Margaret's second magic puts him a step ahead, but still, either one of them could, if they chose to end this fight in an instant. Which really is not all too surprising, given how devastating their blows have the potential of being to either one of them. It depends on who strikes first and who endures the longest. As Margaret tells Mash that they should enjoy themselves, Mash casually agrees with him, his fists raised as they stand opposed to one another on opposite sides of the page as they prepare for their fight, a fight which will have to happen sometime in the future as the chapter transitions away from them for the final 2 pages. Now we are looking at a shadowy group riding on what appear to be dragons, with a hooded figures commenting on how they kept their dear Mash waiting. A man we know, Selwall, the man riding alongside this hooded figure, calls father. We also see one other thus far unnamed member of Innocent Zero as the final scene of the chapter is father commenting on how splendid this is. They are going on a trip. Seems like I thought correctly, the tournament will not get to go on without a hitch as Innocent Zero is coming in to mess everything up. This very much reminds me of the whole Chunin exam/invasion arc in Naruto Part 1, only probably on a much smaller scale as they do not appear to be bringing an entire army's worth of people with them. My main question now is what father wants with Mash, and is it possible that he knew about Mash prior to his enrollment at Eastern Academy? But whatever his and Innocent Zero's aims are, we will have to wait until next week to find out. I've been the Anonymous Weeb and this has been my review of Chapter 58 of Mashle. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy and ring the bell to keep up to date when I update.